Hello, Star Trek fans, and welcome to the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast. My name is Kim.
And my name is James.
And we're watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine from the beginning, one episode at a time. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're on Season 1, Episode 12, Who Mourns for Morn? This episode aired January 15th, 1998. Before we talk about this one, anything to say about last week's episode, which was Waltz?
There was no singing, there was no dancing, and it was very grim.
Yeah, and we're recording this right around Christmas, so I was hoping for a little Nutcracker waltz,
Yeah.
But no.
I felt let down by the name.
Yeah, definitely.
No, that was a good, if not grim, episode.
Yeah. And this one is not grim, and the name is pretty much what happens.
It's definitely a little more uplifting and a little more humorous than last week's.
I don't know if it's uplifting. Lighthearted, I will give you.
That is a better word to use, yes.
Well, you have the notes this week, so are you ready to go?
I am ready. We open in Quark's bar. Odo comes in to talk to Morn, who is in his traditional seat, but Morn just ignores him, and we see it's a hologram. Quark explains Morn's been away on business for 2 weeks, but he likes to keep the hologram there because people love Morn. He's like a mascot, says Quark. He then goes on to explain how he makes people feel like they're at home, and the last time Morn was away, sales dropped by 5%.
I do like that he has data. I mean, for a change, he's making some decisions based on accurate information.
Yeah, that actually seems like a good business practice.
Yeah.
They continue with the in-show joke about Morn never speaking, because Odo asks, does it speak? And Quark explains how an interactive hologram is super expensive, and plus it's a relief not to hear Morn go on and on.
Right.
So they continue the joke that nobody ever actually hears Morn speak.
Yeah.
Cisco and Jadzia come into the bar, and Dax is very shocked to see Morn, and we discover the reason why is that Morn's ship was caught in an ion storm, and he's dead. And we go into the opening.
I have very few notes in this whole episode, so I don't have a lot to say about anything. Basically, my reaction is, yeah, that's what happened.
Well, now we see people gathering for the memorial or wake or whatever it is they do with Lurians. And we learn a little of Lurian tradition, which is to give gifts to the deceased to sustain them in the afterlife.
Yeah, I like that. That's nice.
Yeah. Julian and Miles sound like they'll be getting him some booze.
Yeah.
Worf comments he was a great sparring partner. And Dax admits that she had something of a crush on him. And in a traditional bad soap opera moment, Worf gets all weirdly jealous hearing about how Jadzia had a former crush.
Yeah. Before they even knew each other.
Yeah.
And they imply that what makes Worf the maddest is that Morn wasn't interested in her. It's just so stupid, the whole thing with the two of them. It's a good example on this show when they don't know what to do with couples, they do this kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, it just feels like lazy crap. It's like, did you pull this from an episode of insert bad sitcom episode here?
Yeah, I'd rather you just left them out of the episode than did something like that.
Odo tells Major Kira that he's bringing a bottle opener as he thought it might come in handy. And Major Kira comments, very thoughtful.
I thought it was too.
Yeah, I really like this.
Mm-hmm.
And this goes straight to my, Odo is so much more than the founders. He actually cares enough about honoring Morn's traditions. And does something appropriate. It's a really, again, it's another little piece that shows the difference between Odo and the majority, if not all his people.
Yeah, it shows that he has empathy, and it also shows that he has respect for others.
Yes.
And he doesn't just hate their culture because it's not his culture. Right. Yeah, it shows a lot about him, I agree.
Yeah, if you'd invited Evil Founder Woman, I'm pretty sure she would have turned up with like a card saying, good, one less solid.
You know, Odo's not in this episode a lot. Yeah. He's in a few scenes, but I really enjoyed him in this episode.
Quark is very surprised by the turnout and tells Odo Morn died without paying this month's bar tab. And it's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Which I could believe with the amount of time Morn seems to spend in the bar.
Yeah.
Then Quark makes an amusing speech about how this bar was his home, and in a surprisingly smart piece of marketing says how the greatest tribute to Morn would be to make sure his seat was never empty, and then grabs some unlucky Bajoran guy and sits him in the chair.
Yeah, sit here.
Cisco now informs Quark that in Morn's will, he left everything to Quark, and Quark is very surprised by this. And then we go to Odo giving Quark Morn's financial records, and surprisingly, he was flat broke.
This is a good example of where I enjoyed Odo in this episode. He really thought that was funny.
Yes, he is taking a great deal of pleasure in Quark's discomfort.
Yeah, he's like studying him very carefully. This is a different kind of empathy.
Yes. This does somewhat surprise Quark, as Morn always actually paid his bills. And then Quark gets excited that, well, all the money must be tied up in inventory, which Odo, again, seems to find very amusing when he takes him to see the containers full of overripe Livian beets.
Oh, with the steam coming off of them.
My note here says, nobody wants beets.
Stinky.
Well, Quark's next idea is, well, maybe his quarters were full of objects d'art. And Quark gets excited again, as it must all be valuable.
Interesting that Quark speaks French.
Oui. In Morn's quarters, Quark is further disappointed when we see that all that is in there is a mud bath, which was his bed, and a painting of a matador.
Which we saw that episode where he got the painting.
Yes.
The In the Cards episode.
1423, we see Morn leaving the auction with the matador painting.
That was funny.
Odo leaves Quark alone, looking at the mud, and all of a sudden, a woman pops out from the mud bath and tells Quark that her name is Laurel, Morn's former wife. She tells Quark he had a substantial retirement fund, which was 1,000 bricks of gold plus latinum. He'd won it in the Lesepian lottery. And she says, it's all ours.
Yeah.
And because Quark is an idiot,
horny,
greedy, and she also appears to be naked, he doesn't actually ask any more questions.
Right. He's like, oh, so everything that was Mourn's is now mine. Drool, drool.
Yeah.
Moron.
And we now see Quark draining the mud bath and telling Laurel he's looking for the latinum. She's surprised he doesn't know where Morn kept it. She's very easily manipulating Quark, and he's totally falling for it. She tells him, when we find it, we'll go on a long vacation together.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure if you did that, you wouldn't be coming back from vacation.
Yeah, exactly. It'd be a one-way trip.
I think you just really have to roll your eyes at Quark. It's that Ferengi thing of they just don't seem to learn from their mistakes. How many times did that sketchy freighter captain, whatever her name was, basically rip him off, like when she dumped the Jem'Hadar baby on him?
Right. And he went from making a good business decision at the beginning of the episode to this. Yeah. I guess we're supposed to believe they're really gullible or something, but it doesn't make any sense that people who are so deceptive in business would be gullible to anything.
Yeah. Well, that's part of my theory about the Ferengi, that they're actually terrible, really bad businessmen.
Yeah.
And there's only a few of them who are actually any good, like the Nagus and his mother and, maybe one or two others. But most of them really are terrible. But they tell themselves they're really good.
Because they care so much about profit and are so greedy.
Right.
Yeah.
Quark is now playing Tongo with Dax, telling her that he scanned the whole station and the latinum isn't on here. Dax is very suspicious and tells him not to trust this woman and don't be fooled by a pretty face, which is exactly how you can fool Quark every time.
Yeah. But he does say that he doesn't trust her, but he still does no research.
I think he's just telling Dax that.
Something Quark says in this scene is, he says, I deserve Morn's money. Why does he deserve Morn's money?
That's a good question. I think Ferengi just believe they deserve the money.
I guess, yeah.
Quark goes back to his quarters carrying the Matador painting, but waiting inside for him are two green aliens with very oddly shaped heads.
Yes.
The makeup effects here actually are really quite good. They sort of look like dinosaurs.
Yeah, kind of lime green.
They tell him they were former business partners of Morn, and Morn took out a loan with them, oddly enough, for 1,000 bars of gold-pressed latinum.
What a coincidence.
These guys are a little threatening, as they kind of seem like gangsters, but Quark talks his way into paying them only 50% of the bars, but only after one of them breaks the Matador painting over Quark's head.
Right.
After they leave, Quark finds, in the lining of the painting, a claim slip for the storage locker in the station's assay office. Quark is super excited about this and shouts, Morn, wherever you are, I love you. He is very excited at the prospect of getting the money.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't heard from the assay office in a while.
No, there was one mention of it. I can't remember now. Was it earlier this season or last season? But in general, we talked about it a lot in the beginning in season 1, but no, we don't go back there.
Quark is now arguing with Odo, who tells him the contents of a deceased person's security locker have to be inspected by security. I might side with Quark here because he says Odo just made that up because he wanted to be nosy.
Yes, I think so. Yep.
Quark is also gloating about seeing Odo's face when his 1,000 bricks of latinum are wheeled in,
Right.
only to discover it's one guy carrying one small box. But it does contain a brick of latinum, with a note on the back in Morn's handwriting saying, "The rest is in the Bank of Boleus," with an account number. Something in this scene that is another Ferengi trait: counting all of your chickens before they hatched. They're already working out how they're going to spend the money before they even have it, before they even know it exists.
And why didn't he do something smart at this point and put that money back in the assay office?
Right.
But he puts it in his jacket pocket.
Yeah. Odo also notes that this wasn't in Morn's financial record. And when Quark leaves, Odo is doing the, this is interesting look on his face. So, you know something's up. Quark now runs into L'Rell, who wants an update on where the money is. He brushes her off, but when he gets in the turbo lift, he finds she's lifted the brick of latinum that he tucked into his jacket.
Yeah.
Because he's an idiot and easily distracted when anybody rubs his ears.
Yeah, and I'd like to know where she put that brick of latinum.
Well,
she was barely wearing any clothes.
Well, do we want to talk about the weight of a gold bar that size?
Yeah, it would have been very heavy, and she had not even enough fabric to hide just the size of it, let alone the weight.
I rewatched the scene where Quark got the bar, and I estimate that block to be about 200 millimeters by 150 by 30. So that's like 8 by 6 by 1 in freedom units. And the corners looked like they were at 45-degree angles. So using those estimations and the online gold weight calculator, it came out as about 7 kilograms, which is about 15.5 pounds. And he's just tucking it in his jacket.
He tucks it in his jacket and she somehow hides it in a bathing suit.
And then lifts it out of his jacket without him noticing.
Yeah, without him noticing right in front of him. Not likely.
Exactly. As Quark tries to leave the elevator, the 2 green aliens are waiting for him and threateningly remind him that they're getting tired of waiting.
Right.
Quark goes to his quarters to call the Bank of Boleus, and waiting for him there is a guy with a phaser.
Phoebe's father-in-law.
He immediately asks, "How much do you want?"
1,000 bars. No, 1,000. What is it?
1,000 bars, yeah. The guy says, "Attempted bribery, that'll add a few more years to your sentence." And he reveals he's Lurian security and has an extradition order for Quark's arrest on the charge of conspiracy to intercept government property, namely 1,000 bars of gold-pressed latinum. The guy tells him that the money was a bequest from the royal family of Luria. Morn was the crown prince. In the event of Morn's death, the money had to be returned. This story just gets wilder and wilder.
Yes, and still Quark looks nothing up. He's just, okay, yeah, sure.
Oh, yeah, sure.
I'll believe this guy.
Yeah. Didn't anybody else on the station notice that this is actually Ilon Tandro, the special envoy from Calestron 4?
Yeah, this guy's been in a lot of Star Trek episodes.
Yes.
Including a different character on this show in season 1 in the Dax episode.
Yeah, with only minor makeup. He looks exactly the same.
Yeah, that is funny.
Quark then tells him about L'Rell, which seems to upset him. And then he tells him about the 2 alien brothers, which seems to upset him even more. He says he won't let them get between the royal family and its latinum, and he wants Quark to help him catch the criminals. He tells Quark, call the bank, have the latinum delivered, and leave the rest to me. This guy's story is just too fishy.
Well, and even the way that he's waving his phaser around, you can tell he's not a professional anything. But again, Quark just has no questions.
This is all great.
Yep.
No problems.
Legit. The Zebra wants my credit card number. This seems legit.
Yeah. We now have a scene that O'Brien is sitting in the bar fixing an optronic relay in Morn's old seat. And he tells Julian that he's keeping it warm. When it's fixed and he's about to leave, Julian volunteers to take over and Miles says, "Good man." So they're keeping Morn's chair warm.
Yeah, it was a good marketing ploy.
Back to Quark, who's entering his quarters and shouts, "Is anyone here?" That made me laugh. That I thought was very funny. And sure enough, Lorella's there, telling him, "You have to help me. Someone who's following me."
Yeah.
And the door chimes. Quark won't answer it, so they just override the lock. L'Rell hides, and it's the 2 alien brothers. Then the door chimes again, and when they don't answer, this person starts to override the lock too.
Right.
And in comes the Lurian security guy. Quark tries to alert him by nodding his head in the direction of where the brothers are hiding and where Lorella's hiding, but he just asks Quark, "What's wrong with your neck?"
Again, another clue.
That he just doesn't have any idea.
Yeah.
Out come the alien brothers, and they all know each other. They call him Hayne, and they end up both pointing blasters at each other.
Right.
But Laurel steps out saying, leave him alone, Hayne. So everybody here knows each other.
Yeah, and then they're like, Laurel!
Yes.
Like, look, it's a reunion.
So we find out all the stories these people have been telling are not true.
Right.
And Quark asks, please don't tell me that Morn didn't have any latinum. Hayne then asks Quark, have you ever heard of the Lesepian Mother's Day heist? Quark says, who hasn't heard of it? The central bank was robbed of 1,000 bars of latinum. And at this point, I think the penny drops. These guys, along with Morn, were the robbers. Except Morn ran off with all the latinum. They knew he'd stashed it and were waiting for the statute of limitation to expire, which happened 2 weeks earlier. So they're here to find out where Morn stashed the cash. Now, as the latinum is on the way, they decide they don't need Quark anymore. And we go into a very dramatic ad break. Well, the alien brothers suggest making it look like an accident, but Quark tells them that they need him if they want to take delivery. Nusk, the shorter of the two brothers, grabs Quark and intends to cut off his thumb, but Hayne convinces him that they do need him after all, and they'll cut him in.
And Quark just starts screaming when the guy threatens to cut off his thumb.
Yes.
Just screeching.
Hayne doesn't want to let Quark out of their sight, so the whole merry team end up in the bar. Odo comes into the bar and asks Quark why it's closed, and Quark gives an excuse of a private party with former friends of Morn. But it'll be open again at 1600 hours. Odo very suspiciously says, I see, and leaves. Odo's picking up on something's wrong.
Do you think that Quark was trying to tell him something, or no?
Yes, because I think the implication of Quark's being closed at that time would be suspicious enough for Odo. And this little group of people that Odo had never seen before, it would set Odo's suspicions off.
Yeah, I guess so.
I mean, he knows Quark well enough. Now, in the cargo bay, a very odd-looking container has arrived, and Quark uses his thumbprint to accept it, which is why they needed him. They could have just cut off his thumbprint.
Yes.
We open the container, and there's a nice shot from the inside looking out, with both Quark and Laurel gasping when they look in, and the camera pans to show it's full of latinum bricks. Quark is so excited, he's leaning into the container saying, I'll count it. And behind Quark, all the robbers have pulled out phasers and are pointing at each other. It's a nice little scene because they're sort of slightly out of focus.
Yep.
It's well done.
And Quark is so focused on the latinum, he doesn't even notice.
Well, Crit, the taller of the brothers, calls Nask slow, which annoys him, and he turns his phaser towards Crit. Then Laurel turns her phaser towards Hayne, and Nask starts shooting, and misses. And then the other two start shooting, and missing. And as the phaser blasts fly, Quark jumps into the container to hide.
Yeah, that seems like a good idea.
So with Quark inside the container, we hear the firing continue, and a phaser shot passes through the container, terrifying Quark. And finally, we hear Odo outside, telling them all to drop their weapons. We now see Odo and security have taken control of the situation and are rounding up the miscreants. Odo opens the container and tells the cowering Quark that they're all going to prison. An excited Quark says, it's mine, all mine.
Yeah.
And tells Odo, what you're about to hear is the most beautiful sound in the galaxy. And he picks up 2 bricks of the latinum and then taps them together, repeating what he did earlier with 2 strips of latinum at the Tongo table, except these bars kind of thud together and then break into dust.
Yeah. Whoops.
Quark starts shouting, somebody has extracted all the latinum from the bricks. They're nothing but worthless gold. Chuckling and smiling, Odo says, and it's all yours.
Oh, Odo. So happy.
He is so enjoying this.
Yes.
Odo is clearly getting a lot of enjoyment from this.
I did laugh at that.
Quark is now back in the bar, and he looks at Morn's usual chair and starts wrestling with it, trying to pull it off the floor.
And there's also maybe something to the fact that this is something he can fight back against, just a chair, because he's not able to fight back against any of these people who were trying to steal from him.
Yeah, it's the way he's glowering at the chair and then comes around the bar and starts fighting with it. Odo comes into the bar and tells him, there's someone here to see you. And lo and behold, it's Morn. He apparently faked his own death, and Odo says, I'll let him tell you all about it. But before he can speak, Quark says, wait, I don't want to hear it. We now go into Quark giving some exposition as he's figured it out. Morn was using Quark to keep his old partners off balance until they turned on themselves. It was a scam to get these guys off Morn's back. Morn just nods. Quark says, I could have been killed. I thought we were friends. He does have one question. What happened to the latinum? Morn looks around and makes a gurgling sound and then, spits some latinum into a glass. Quark says, "Of course, your second stomach. You've been keeping it there for all these years." Morn nods again, and then he pushes the small glass of latinum towards Quark, who is basically in awe, saying, "That must be 100 bricks worth." And then the camera starts panning out, showing just the two of them in the bar, and Quark says, "You know, you and I should consider doing business together. Two enterprising gentlemen like us could do all right for ourselves."
Yeah.
And as the scene ends, Quark says, "Take that gold dust of yours. I hear some primitive cultures consider it quite valuable." The end.
Well, not a very complicated episode. I have very few notes. Only two things, really, that I took note of. And we got through that pretty quickly. And it is funny to contrast it to some of the other episodes this season of how dark and dramatic and complex.
Yeah.
And then we have this sort of goofball episode.
Oh, I would agree, yeah.
But I assume you have some overanalysis.
I have a significant amount of overanalysis.
Oh, shocking.
Let's start with the first one. At the memorial, Kira says every now and then Quark really surprises her. And Odo agrees. And considering Quark really isn't that great of a liar,
right,
I'm going to assume that he was actually being genuine about Morn, because he's a big part of where all his revenue is coming from.
Or at least convincing. I think we've established that he likes to put on a show and be the center of attention.
Yeah.
And he does give sort of a eulogy or a little bit of a dramatic speech. And then he gets a lot of clapping at the end. And so it seemed like Kira was impressed that he was being sincere and giving this meaningful speech. Odo was not being, he wasn't thinking that same thing. But at least that's how I read that scene.
I looked at that one of maybe he was kind of being genuine because he was such a good customer.
Yeah, maybe.
You know, maybe Ferengi do actually...
They like their paying customers.
Yes.
Yeah, fair enough.
Next thing, once again we see the security on this station is pretty terrible. Everyone seems to be able to override locks with absolutely no difficulty.
And get on board the station with phasers.
Yeah.
Or some kind of weapons.
What happened to all the weapons checks?
Yeah, we lost those somewhere.
Yes, they fell out of the story writer's guide.
Right.
The final point, and I was joking about having a lot of points.
Okay.
Morn took an awful risk with Quark's life.
That's the whole point?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, he absolutely did. I guess he knew for sure that Quark would be greedy enough to do everything he could to try to find the latinum. So I think, he knew that at least that part of it would play out the way that it did. But he had to know that he was putting Quark in danger and just not caring, I guess. Or I guess it's possible that he also thought Quark would be clever enough to get out of it. It is possible.
That's true. He does talk to Quark a lot.
He does, yeah, supposedly.
Yeah, which we never see.
Yeah.
So maybe he knew Quark well enough that if he put him in this situation, he would do exactly what Quark would do.
Yeah.
And Quark is fairly good at not getting himself killed, except when he worked with that Bajoran woman about getting the list and then got shot in the chest.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's right. I guess if you look at the other criminals, they were doing the exact thing that each other expected. So maybe Morn already knew that that's what each of them would do. He knew the one guy would come in pretending he was royalty, and he knew L'Rell would pretend to be his wife, and he knew the brothers would come in and say, oh, he owes us money.
Yeah.
So maybe they're so predictable that he didn't feel like they were really dangerous, more annoying.
Oh, yeah.
That's giving Morn a lot of credit, though, but it's possible, I guess.
From a writing standpoint, I guess, because you really do know so little about Morn.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't speak and they've never really developed the character.
Right.
You could just hand wave at all of that and go, well, Morn was actually the mastermind who planned this whole thing.
It could be, yeah.
And picked these people because they're idiots.
Yeah.
And that wraps it up for this very complex episode.
Well, I only have two things to say in my overanalysis. One of them is, I assume that Quark falls for every email scam. I mean, how many princes has he sent money to based on an email that he got? Because he believes every stupid story that anybody tells him. He's like, oh, this is going to make me rich.
No, Rom, this Nigerian prince really does need 1,000 bars of latinum.
And then I'll get 2,000 back. It'll be great.
You're right.
It's just so silly how naive he seems to be.
This goes back to my point. The joke with the Ferengi is they really are bad businessmen at heart.
Yeah, I think you're right. And then my second note that I made is, did we really need to do this to this character? The character of Morn had a point. It was a little bit of an inside joke. And now we've, at least from my perspective, we've kind of killed that joke, because now what we know is that Morn's a thief. And he's not even an honorable thief. He ripped off all of the people who did the crime with him. And I'm not impressed. And then even in the middle of all of this, they didn't even do something that I thought maybe they would, which is have him say one line or have him start to say a word or something and then end the episode. I don't know. Yeah. It just felt like a waste of a character, I guess. Yeah. It was strange.
Right. While I agree with you that it might reduce Morn a little, that he's just kind of a common thief, I'll have an alternative. Here's some headcanon. How about Morn is actually something of a Robin Hood? Because that planet, the Lesepians, they're like the biggest scam artists in the galaxy. They run like all the fake call centers and steal billions of blocks of gold-pressed latinum from old people who don't really know what's going on. And this whole thing was engineered by Morn to steal money from them. And if you notice, his compatriots in this crime weren't the sharpest knives in the drawer.
No.
And he specifically picked them. So he actually robbed the bank, took all that latinum, took all the bricks of latinum, and then actually gave the money to needy causes or charities, or the Bajoran orphans, could be that. And all he did was keep a completely reasonable finder's fee or administrative fee of about 20%. So he has like 200 bars. He gave 100 to Quark for getting these people off his back and putting his life in danger because, he's not a unreasonable person. So most of that money went to good causes.
Wow, that is some real headcanon. I mean, if they even did one of those things in a future episode where they talked about him donating to the Bajoran Orphan Fund or whatever, then yes, it would turn that all around. Otherwise, you're just making stuff up.
I'm reading the unwritten story here.
Oh, yeah. You're creating headcanon to keep yourself happy.
To keep Morn as a good character.
It's kind of the point of the headcanon. Yeah.
So it sort of would make Morn like more of an anti-hero than just a thief?
Yeah. Just a very peculiar episode and a peculiar way to use a character. I imagine they thought it was funny that they would develop this whole story around a character who would still not speak, but the rest of the world looks at things differently. I have my own sensitivities about things.
Right.
But anyway, I don't think there's really anything else to analyze. Quark was sort of a dope in this episode, not a great businessman, as you've said many times. Quite gullible, believed everything anybody said without trying to verify anything, didn't tell anyone because he wanted to keep the money to himself. I assume the actor who plays Rom just wasn't in this episode because it's the kind of thing you would have told to Rom, but he wasn't there, so.
Lita says you're being stupid.
Yeah, right?
That's kind of the nice thing about Rom. He would tell Lita, and Lita would tell him, your brother's being an idiot.
Yeah, right.
I see Rom as somebody who couldn't keep anything from Lita.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, I'll just go to women in the future, and I don't really have anything to say because this was such a nothing burger of an episode. They did, of course, have one female character that they had to really stereotype in the way that they've been doing since season 1. A woman who has to use sexuality to get money or get something from a man. It's just like, yawn. I mean, can you seriously not write a better character than that? It's that laziness that you've talked about before, where, well, I just need a character here, and so I'm just going to use this trope that I've used already 50 times because it's just easy. And from the perspective of the people who are devoting so much time and energy to watching a show, it just looks like you don't care. Yeah. Fortunately, it was a very small part. There wasn't that much that she did, and she was hardly there. And like I said, the episode was a nothing burger, and that was a nothing burger, but just disappointing that with one female character, that's what we have to do with her. And it was just kind of pointless. And we had another, shall I call it an ear job? I don't know. It's just so dumb. So I'm just going to jump to rating.
Okay.
Thumbs up, thumbs down, or neutral. What is your rating?
Wow, this episode. Absolutely solid neutral filler. I think if you looked up the definition of a filler episode, it would be this one.
Yeah, I feel like we could have just taken the week off and been better off rather than having this episode. Absolutely nothing to this episode. I didn't get anything out of it. It wasn't terrible. It wasn't great. We already had that Ferengi episode that was funny where they had to go and save Ram and Quark's mother, right? That was a lighthearted episode that was so much better. This was them just trying to do something with Morn. I don't know, but it wasn't terrible. It just was nothing. So I agree. Just a solid, neutral, meh. I would never watch this again. What's the point? There's nothing to get out of it.
Iggy Pop's 23 seconds on screen was more impactful than this episode.
Now, if Iggy Pop had been one of those brothers, then you would have had something. But
I fear he would have been wasted.
Although the guy who played the taller brother, he was sort of funny and quirky.
Yes.
But yeah, they weren't really menacing in any way. Even when they threatened him by knocking the painting over his head, even that wasn't that threatening. So I don't know.
I think they were aiming for bumbling.
Which, again, is another stereotype on this show that they do. Yeah. When we can't think of a good character or a good set of characters, this is what we do. We make these two bumbling guys, and those are, our scary criminals.
Yeah, these two are kind of almost like a reworking of the two thugs from the Odo Sexy Time episode.
Exactly. Yeah, that's my exact point.
So in summary, a miss all round.
Well, I vote we put episode 12 to bed and move on with hopefully better episodes.
So you're saying that really during editing, we could just open this with saying Quark in the bar with the hologram of Morn and then the ratings.
Morn was dead, then he wasn't. La la.
The end.
Neutral.
Thanks for listening.
I think so, yeah. So that wraps up Season 6, Episode 12. Come back next week for lucky Episode 13. In the meantime, if you'd like to send us your own over-analysis of this, if you can figure out something to analyze in this episode, please send it to us. We would like to hear it. I would be more than happy to read that.
Yeah, I would be fascinated too, yeah.
Yeah, please. I welcome your emails. So you can email us at ReBingeIT@gmail.com or tweet us at ReBingeIT. We're also on Instagram and YouTube at ReBingeIT. You can check us out on TalkThroughMedia.com. You can leave feedback there for individual episodes, and you can listen to the other podcasts in our network. We also have a Patreon through Talk Through Media that benefits all of the podcasts in the network, and that is at patreon.com/Star Trek TTM.
Thanks for joining us on the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast.
That's it for me.
And that's it from me.